today I want to talk a little bit about what I think are some of the fundamentals of a great job interview, and try to provide you some tips and ideas of what I've done in my past and what I look for, when I'm interviewing as well. So I'll start with a few interview tips. I think it's always important to try to take a few notes. I think that's a really important piece, because often if you get a multi-part question in an interview, you might forget the first part of the question if you haven't taken the time to actually write that down. So I think it's always important to take a few notes, but also to maybe pause before you begin answering. So that first one, I think it pays to take a moment, maybe summarize the question back to the interviewer to make sure that you've understood. And that gives you a bit of time to think about what your answer is going to be before you actually, launch into it. Of course, it always pays to highlight your strengths. I think that is difficult for some of us sometimes, but if you have your resume handy in front of you, then you can kind of quickly go to a few of those pieces to be able to get that sort of out there. And then, of course, it goes without saying that it really does matter about your first impressions. So try to remain pleasant, even when you get a difficult question. It's important to take this as an opportunity, even if it's a question you haven't prepared for. This is an opportunity to get to show a side of your personality, and you want to make sure that's the best personality you can kind of put forward. I do think that an interview is about give and take, and so asking questions is an important piece as well. Typically, there's time left at the end of an interview to do just that, but I think it's always valuable to take that opportunity and ask some questions, and to not only ask some questions, but to show what you know about the company that you've applied for. And so if there's some information that you can drop in that question, then I think so much the better. And the other piece that I think is an important general tip is to always check on the time. So, interviews are often very compact, and there's a set number of questions to go through, and you don't want to burn up all of your time on the first couple of questions, because typically the last questions might be the meatiest. And so, if you're getting a question that's going to be open-ended, you might want to check and just see if more time is possible. So I think there's some expectations around what to do for an interview. I always like to be early. I think that helps, even just walking around outside if it's a face-to-face, or being in the waiting room for the interview. I think it's important not to let that psych yourself out, but to kind of envision yourself doing really well in the interview, and to give yourself a couple of moments thinking about how well you'll answer those questions. I think it's important to dress for success in interviews, of course, and so picking your clothes the night before, I think, is an important thing. But it's always difficult. You don't want to be too ostentatious, but you do want to stand out. And so maybe having something that's a bit of a flair, if you're, maybe it's a pocket square or a bow tie or something like that, or perhaps the earrings, something that maybe would catch attention, but isn't so much that it distracts away from what you're talking about. And then, as I said, it doesn't hurt to bring some paper and pencils with you, and perhaps some questions that you've already pre-thought of. But most importantly, I think it's important to go in there and be confident, and to be, just enjoying yourself, or to look like you're enjoying yourself as much as you possibly can. You can't change who you are, so you might as well be your authentic self. So, the typical types of questions that I end up asking are often behavioral questions, because I'm trying to understand more about the person's personality and how they might fit in with the team, and how they might take on some of the challenges that we have in our work environment. And so I think those can be kind of difficult. So when an interview asks you for an example of a time when you did something, that's a typical behavioral question. I like to get somebody who has a specific answer. So rather than just say, oh, I've done that sort of thing before, I want to hear the details of the story. And so to get there, you have to kind of practice some of those questions in advance, to have those examples on your fingertips, and to be able to kind of give a complete narrative arc, where you have a beginning, a middle, and an end. And I'm looking for those details because it's in the details that I'm trying to gain an awareness of how you problem solve, and how you deal with others. And I want to see your involvement. So often people, when they get a question like this, they start thinking of a time when they were involved in a team, and the story ends up being about other members of the team. And that's great. Teamwork is important too, but I want to hear about you in that time. And so I think it's important to try to give, as I said, a complete arc, give the background of why you were in this situation, how you were involved in this situation, and most importantly, what decision you made to get yourself out of that situation. That's really where I want to get to. And so the last is a little bit of an acronym. What's the situation? What's the task? What's the action? And what's the result? So be a star. And I think, as you've already heard me say, it's important to practice, practice, practice. I used to, before I was in this job, I would apply for jobs that I didn't think I had a real chance of getting, or that I wasn't very well suited for, just to get the opportunity to practice the interview skills in a real situation. Because, if I haven't done it in a while, I'm a bit rusty. And as I said, it takes time to get some of those stories at your fingertips and to remember some of the awesome things that you've done in your past. And so it's often not the first interview, but the second or third where you actually, have it down and are in a rhythm. And if you don't have the luxury of doing that, then obviously asking a friend or a neighbor or something like that is a great way, or even just practicing in the mirror. So I think it's always good to try to build on it. If you've failed at an interview, I think it pays to write in and see if you can get more information about why you might have struggled, in that interview. Often that feedback is very, very positive. And I think through that practice, you get used to some of the types of questions that you're going to be asked. There's the typical, tell me about yourself starter question at the interview. And I think those questions are tricky. It's deceptively tricky, because you can burn a lot of time talking about things that don't ultimately lead to much. And so, tell me about yourself is really an opportunity to quickly summarize your resume. But it's probably something that you want to keep into a very short amount of time. And then, we always get hit with the type of question like, what is your biggest weakness? And those questions are difficult because we always want to put ourselves in a positive light. And so, again, having some practice with some of those uncomfortable questions is really, really important in order to be able to.
Jim, we're having trouble hearing you.
Oh, okay.
Did you move away from your mic? Could you repeat the last couple things you said? Thank you.
Yeah, no, sorry. I apologize for that. I'll try to speak a little louder. Can you hear me okay now?
Yes, yeah, now okay. It's good. Thanks.
So just if you get a question that's around what is your biggest weakness, I think you have to look at what some of your strengths are and try to alter that to sound as though it's a bit of a weakness. Talk about where the negative is in that strength, and to pitch it as something that you're working to improve. And so I think some of those things are important, and really come through in practice. And of course, being able to deal with questions that are personal, that are questions that are sort of illegal in a way, to not answer about your personal life. It takes some skill as well. How do you defer from a question that you don't want to answer because you don't want it to bias against you? It takes a lot of, and no one should ask you those questions, but sometimes they happen by accident when someone's not thinking, or they've done a lot of interviews. And so being able to politely steer that conversation in a different direction, either by casting the question back to the interviewer, or demurring, or just trying to move on quickly into another space. All of those things take a little bit of practice to get smooth. So I think there's always time at the end of an interview for your own questions, and trying to find questions that show that you care about the company and the work that you're about to do, I think is really critical. Rather than simply asking about what is the pay, what are the benefits, what are the, what's the work schedule, try to ask something that digs at the heart or the philosophy of that work culture. And so I've given you a couple of questions here that you might want to ask the next time you're in a job interview, like, what do you like as an interviewer about working here in this institution? And how has the position that I'm applying for changed or evolved over time? Because you want a job that is evolving, and you want to hear about what is changing in the company culture as it goes through. And then lastly, I think you always want to look like you're an action-oriented person. So what would be my first priority if I were the successful candidate? I think those sorts of questions open up a greater discussion about what you want to do in the company and how you see yourself fitting into the company. And I think that's important.